Let's start with the male part of that. So I think that right now our society is criticizing itself. That's part of, let's call it patriarchy theory, and the idea is the hierarchies that are characteristic of our society are male-dominated and predicated on power and tyranny. Okay, so I don't buy that. I think that any hierarchical structure can degenerate into tyranny, but I think that most of the hierarchical structures in the West are about as good as hierarchical structures ever get. And if you think we can do without hierarchical structures, then you don't know what you're talking about, because you can't organize your perception without a hierarchical structure, and you can't organize people in terms of pursuing a valuable goal. You can't even say that a goal is valuable without producing a hierarchy. So there's no getting rid of hierarchies. Now then you can say, well, yeah, but the hierarchy is based on power and it's corrupt. And I don't think that's true in the West, although hierarchies can become corrupt. Okay, so let's say you do buy that though. The hierarchy is patriarchal and it's corrupt. Well then let's say you're a young man and you're ambitious. Well then obviously you're corrupt too, because your ambition is to take your place in the corrupt hierarchy. And so because the hierarchies aren't tyrannical and because they're based on competence, your ambition, if you have any sense, is actually to become competent. But if you confuse that with a power drive, and there's tremendous confusion about that, then you confuse young men, because they think if they're ambitious and they want to get ahead, let's say, they want to be useful and competent, that they're somehow buying into the tyranny. So you actually punish the young men for their virtues. And I actually think that that's part and parcel of this critical process, because I think that one of the things that drives the people who are theorizing about the tyrannical patriarchy is that they absolutely detest competence. And it's a deep war. So it's very annoying. It's very hard on young men, but it's also hard on young women. So it's hard on young women because they end up with partners who are confused. They're confused about the relationship between masculine and feminine. They're confused about what role they should play out in the world. Apparently, it seems to be fine if a woman wants to play a patriarchal role. That seems to be perfectly fine ethically. I don't understand how that can be the case if the patriarchy itself is corrupt. It's corrupt, but it's okay if women occupy the positions of power. It's like, okay, how does that make sense? Well, none of this makes sense. Part of the reason it doesn't make sense is because it isn't designed to make sense. It's designed to be destructive. Now, there's more complications than that. There's lots of reasons why people are unstable in their roles now. And one of the big reasons is the introduction of the birth control pill. So we still haven't adapted to that by any stretch of the imagination, and God knows how long it'll take. It's a huge biological transformation for women to have voluntary control over their reproductive function. You can't possibly overstate how massive a technological revolution that is. It's like a biological mutation. You know, it's like we're a different species. It's really a big deal. And so there's plenty of waves produced by that, and we haven't sorted that out at all. Let's start with the notion that hierarchy is not the secondary consequence of the West or the patriarchy or capitalism. That's wrong. Okay, how do we know it's wrong? Well, animals organize themselves into hierarchies. So it's obviously not a mere consequence of human construction, much less human construction of Western society over the last 500 years. It's in animals. Well, how long has it been around? Well, how about 350 million years? How's that for not a consequence of capitalism? Yeah, that's pretty damn solid. And so that's why I talk about the relationship between crustacean hierarchies and the simple crustacean nervous system and our nervous system, which share a number of quite remarkable similarities. And the point isn't that we should behave like lobsters and all the idiotic criticisms. It's that there's a neurobiological continuity that demonstrates that hierarchies are so ancient that our brains have adapted to them as if they are permanent elements of reality. And that's part of the archetype of the father, actually, is the permanent reality of the hierarchy. So the question is, well, why are there hierarchies? And the answer is, well, there's an answer for animals and there's an answer for humans. It's you have to organize a hierarchy when you're pursuing scarce resources, because otherwise it's just a war. That's the alternative. There's either a hierarchy of access, which is why chickens have a pecking order. The top chickens eat first. Doesn't mean the bottom chickens don't eat, although it does mean that if there's not enough food. And all the chickens accept the pecking order because otherwise they have to fight. You say, well, that's pretty rough on the bottom chickens. And yeah, but not as rough as being pecked to death. Like, it's rough, but it's not as rough as constant battle. So a hierarchy in some no small part is the alternative to Hobbes, to the Hobbesian state of everyone against everyone else. And so that's one reason for hierarchy. Another reason is, well, if you're going to pursue, let's assume that you have to pursue something useful to stay alive. Now, I don't think anybody's going to disagree about that, because you just sit around, you're going to die. So you have to go out there and do things. Well, where? Well, in the social environment. Oh yes, with other people. So you have to cooperate and compete with other people to do something useful. Well, then you're going to make a hierarchy around that goal. And in that hierarchy, two things are going to happen. A small number of people are going to be the best at doing that. So that's an iron law. Not everyone is a soccer star. Not everyone is a great musician. Not everyone is an artist. There's lots of hierarchies, but in each hierarchy, it's a small number of people at the top who do most of the productive work. So one of the things I learned from Carl Jung, whom I have great respect for, is that we necessarily exist inside a hierarchy of values. And that manifests itself all the time, because in order to act, things have to come to a point, right? For you to do something, you have to decide at that moment that that thing is more important to do than anything else that you're doing. And it isn't only how you act, it's even how you perceive. Because when you look at the world, you look at some things, one thing, rather than all the other things you could look at. So even to look at something, and this is technically true, you have to value the thing that you're looking at. Okay, so you're always using values to interact with the world, perceptually and in terms of action. Now those values are organized, otherwise you're a chaotic mess. So they're organized. There's some consistency in what you do, right? There's a narrative driving it. That's another way of looking at it. It means you exist inside a value hierarchy. Some things are more important than others, pointing towards something. Now, you might be fragmented and pointing to a bunch of contradictory things, but that's not helpful. Let's assume that you're a reasonably integrated person. And so you're pursuing something of value. It's at the top of your hierarchy. Functionally speaking, whatever that is at the top of your hierarchy, that's God for you.